You're listening to the Hoban Minute series on Legitimizing Cannabis. I'm your host, Eric Singular, sitting alongside Chief Operating Officer of Gateway Proven Strategies, Ceci Zach. Today we're talking with President and Director of Innovations at the International Cannabis and Cannabinoids Institute, Steph Sherer. Steph, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Steph, how are you doing this fine Wednesday? Where do you find yourself in the world?
I'm actually in the Sequoia National Forest, hiding from my apartment in Washington, D.C.
Well, we don't blame you for that, and it's wonderful to be out in nature, especially this part of the year.
And Steph, this is Ceci, and thank you so much for joining us. We were so excited to have you on the show because as I've talked to our listeners in the past about my beliefs in legitimizing cannabis, and you know my background coming from pharmaceuticals. Can you help us understand what you do at ICCI and the value proposition that you bring to the industry as a whole?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think to describe what ICCI is doing, it's a little helpful to go back a little bit and point out to where I sort of came into the cannabis, what is now calling itself an industry. In 2002, I created an organization in the United States called Americans for Safe Access, which is a patient advocacy organization that has basically worked to create safe access for patients in the United States. And that took us along a lot of different pathways. As sort of back to your question about legitimizing cannabis, in 2002, the battles that we were fighting were not just the disbelief of it being a medicine, but also a very intense federal reaction to people trying to find access and for those providing it. And so, along that pathway, research was always sort of this big hole that was missing in our discussions with not only politicians and media, but most importantly with individual patients and their doctors. And so, after 18 years of moving policy forward and really experimenting with needs for change in laws and regulations and innovations in the industry, what I learned is that there still was not the research happening that was needed. And part of that was the federal prohibition of cannabis. And so I had been working with many countries to create medical cannabis programs. It's very odd that the United States is still illegal, and even though this is where a lot of the market started. But we were able to actually create federal programs in other countries, and the Czech Republic was one of those. And in my work at implementing that law, I found an academic infrastructure that was willing to study cannabis in a country that was going to allow it. And so that's what led me to create the Center of Excellence, ICCI, in the Czech Republic. And what we've created there is really a platform to allow those who have cannabis products, whether they're for medicinal use, nutritional use, even industrial use, to really invest in the R&D so that the end customers have the data that they need to use these products.
So I have a dream, and my dream is that patients, clinicians, doctors not only understand the value that cannabis can bring to health and wellness, but that people know the dose, the administration route, and the effectiveness of what it is that they're taking for whatever relief that they're looking for. Do you believe it's an opportunity for everyone to jump out and look to create clinical trials that are going to produce country indications similar to what we see with Epidiolex? Or do you think there are alternative ways for us to understand the science in a way that consumers and clinicians really get that value from the product and know exactly what they're going to take and what the effect is going to be?
Well, good for you. Good thing for you is your dream is completely possible. The challenge is convincing this marketplace to invest in the R&D so that can happen. So what I mean by that is that yes, Ivodilex, GW Pharmaceuticals showed that you can take a cannabis product and take it through a traditional pharmaceutical route. That's sort of one extreme end. And through patient advocacy, we've created a what I call political medicine, a space that allows companies to provide products directly to humans without going through any clinical trials, going through any scrutiny, except for potentially some product safety screening. And so in that sort of spectrum, I see a huge opportunity for companies to actually create new pathways for defining medicine. And I think that these pathways can be used by other herbs as well. The challenge is that these companies have to make the investment. I think one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what could the industry be doing better, to create medicines and to sort of follow your dream thesis. And the step back is that this industry needs to stop calling itself an industry. The air quote industry was actually appropriate when it was completely illegal, and it was responsible for every single level of the supply chain. That made it an industry because it had to do everything. But as we move into the rest of the world, the mainstream, and out of the illicit market, what we have is a cannabis market, which the reason that is significant is that the cannabis market wants to participate in a lot of different industries. It wants to participate in
food, beverage,
everything from medicines, nutritionals,
yep.
To building houses, to hempcrete, to fabrics, all of these, to textiles.
Automotive doors.
Exactly. And so if this market wants to move out of just being a feel-good or something that's interesting for very privileged people to have access to, then they need to start looking at the industries in which they want these products to participate. They need to start looking at the guidelines and regulations and what the consumers want. And they need to start, investing in R&D instead of just geographical expansion. And what I mean is that, yes, it could be interesting to have a medication that has cannabis in it. Yes, it could be interesting to have a home that's built by hemp. But what the market has to demonstrate is that it's a better house, that it's a better medicine, and it's a better food. And the only way that can happen is by standardizing products so that they can actually be tested and go through, whether it's higher level observational studies, which I think we're all a little tired of the observational studies, or really moving into clinical trials. And the great thing about looking at clinical trials or clinical testing is that the safety profile of cannabis has been proven as long as you keep it in its plant form. You start pulling things out, you might have a problem. But the pathway is there, and so the work we've been doing at ICCI is really filling the gap for research. So what I mean by that is that even though there has been quite a bit of research on how horrible cannabis is, to actually put cannabis into a medicinal line or even nutritional, there have been tools that have needed to be created for cannabis specific, whether that's at the labs, creating standardized ways to test the product, to specific labeling needs. All of that work has to be done so that if a company is ready to move a product through a pipeline to get it to a consumer, those tools are now there and ready.
So help us understand the difference between what a company could do from a promotional perspective after a clinical trial versus what a company can promotionally say after clinical testing.
So clinical testing is more for cosmetics. It's a scientific demonstration of the claims of the product. So you can't do clinical testing really for nutraceuticals or medicines. It's more for medicines. You can do it for nutraceuticals. So it's more, it's less rigorous, I guess, than a clinical trial. And the requirements of, having academia involved are a little different. But what you can show, there's lots of rules about what you can say about your product. And I don't think you have enough time on this program to go into all of those, so I'd be happy to answer any of your listeners' questions. But what you can do is you can put up data about your product and, say that it's been clinically tested and send consumers to see that work, which would, one, in this market, you'd be one of the only businesses actually doing this work. But two, it tells your consumers that that when they buy your product, that you've achieved a higher level of standardization, so the patient or even the consumer looking to have the same health benefits is going to get the same thing, and they can actually see the demonstrated effect. Right now, consumers, I think we're sort of in it's a hip topic, but I think that that's something that the cannabis market should really be looking at, is that a consumer isn't going to keep going back to find something that works. So if they try a CBD product and there's no CBD in it, and it doesn't work for them, then that's probably their relationship with CBD. They're probably not going back. And so, again, the more clinical testing, clinical trials that we can see are going to be key. But there's, I think people keep talking about Cannabis 3.0, and the reality is we haven't hit 2.0, which in my view, that means product safety and standardization, so that you can then go to 3.0, which means scaling up your product for the intended industries. So, the MS population of this world is not going to stop taking the medication they're taking to take a cannabis product until it's proven that that product is going to work better than what they're taking, and that there is availability and that the product is affordable. And we are very far away from that. And, after spending 18 years running Americans for Safe Access, the reality is while there are millions of Americans that have access to cannabis, it is a very privileged medicine. It is expensive, and you have to have a very set criteria in your life that it's even an option.
Fascinating. And it's really interesting that you put the target market, who benefits from cannabis today, because I hadn't really thought of it that way. But let me just go back to the clinical trials. And since I do come from pharma, I'm used to the $2.7 billion in 8 to 10 years it takes to get a drug to market with a clinical indication. Have you seen trends, and is there data out there that can help shorten the time frame and reduce the amount of money it takes to get any type of clinical claims out in the marketplace that not only validate that safety and standardization that you're talking about, but ultimately giving the consumer the benefit of what it is and why they're taking the product?
Well, I think that with cannabis, you mentioned, that the price tag that you're mentioning includes, and the timeline is this big runway of actually proving the safety of a product. In pharma, they'll create a new compound. They've created a new substance, and then they have to spend years proving that substance is not harmful, because it's something new that's being introduced to humans. And so, really, up to half of the price tag that you were talking about can be spent there. And then a next huge chunk of funds that are spent on drug development have to do with the drug delivery. And for many of these compounds, the toxicity lies in it going through having to pass the stomach, or maybe it being stuck in the intestine. And again, back to the safety issues, and just because this plant has been used for so long, we know a lot about the metabolism of cannabis, whether it's inhaled or digested or used sublingually. So a lot of the work that is, that would be needed for creating one product is already available for all of those. And something that we've done at ICCI is actually create clinical trial models that actually combine safety and efficacy, and actually, pull upon, the data that's out there and really work with our clients to make sure that the formulations they're using are going to have the targeted intent. And so there's a lot of tools for companies out there that want to do this work, so that they're not just starting with, I don't know, maybe what their buddies tell them they think is good for pain, and then start trying to put that through a clinical data system. So, for those who, I would say almost every client I talk to at ICCI are people that are curious, come to me and they tell me that they want to do research, but that's about all they understand. And then, really realizing that it's actually an investment that will have to be made in a long-term vision versus something that they can just put on their website. A lot of people step away. And, for me as a patient advocate, I really see that we have a limited amount of time to move from this sort of political medicine space that patient advocates like myself and our hundreds of thousands of members have created. That countries are not just going to let companies give people cannabis indefinitely without doing this research. And we're already starting to see in countries like Germany and Denmark, almost an irritability of the regulators who are asking, where's the science? Where's the research?
So, Steph, how do we get pharma involved, since they seem to be the target industry to be able to foot the bill, that they've got the capabilities? How do we get pharma involved?
Well, I don't know if pharma wants to be involved. And this is really, I think, where your listeners will probably be excited. The pharma has been studying cannabinoids for decades. This is not some new secret. As soon as the discovery of the endocannabinoid was created, they began looking into this, and there are lots of failed attempts of creating cannabis medicine. I think that the opportunity we have here is actually disrupting the way that we see drug development now, and creating new pathways for medicines that doctors and patients can depend on, but that actually don't need the price tag that you described, but also can, be a reliable medicine for patients. So pharma has put their toe in. They've been doing R&D. They're not interested in any investments right now. And my fear is that the way that they will get involved is not by helping put cannabis products on the market, but by buying up the research that's out there, so that other drugs can stay on the market. And we've seen this in other industries. Of course, it's not. There's all sorts of R&D wars happening every day. And so what I think, so I think that and again, this is definitely why I've devoted my life to advancing cannabis, is this sort of bigger opportunity, which is to really change the way we approach drug development globally. The reason I got into this it was because there was not a medication that would work for me. And, I was in my 20s and a doctor suggested I try cannabis, which was not something I had used before. And, that act saved my life and, made me start asking a lot of questions. And some of those questions around cannabis was that it was illegal and that there was this, very racist drug war that was keeping it so. But the other questions that it led me to was actually how drugs are developed and why they're developed that way. And, what I discovered was that on one hand, yes, there's the big, bad, horrible industry that like patents and want to keep things the way they are. That's definitely one side of it. But the other was really what science we have applied to drug development, and why hasn't this process advanced in over 30 years? The time right now that I see in drug development and for cannabis is really something much bigger than trying to get a pharma company to look at your deck. But what's more exciting is actually envision, jumping in that supply chain, interrupting the way that those finalized drugs at big pharma are making it to the pharmacies, and really invest in this work. And what we'll have on the other side are going to be cheaper, better medicines for people with fewer side effects, and hopefully, healthier humans and a healthier
planet.
planet.
It's been really, really interesting to just sit back and hear you talk about all of these things, because hits on a lot of topics that we discuss on the Hoban Minute. But I do want to ask you two questions if we have the time for it. The first is to go back quite a bit of a way. You talked about how we need companies to invest in R&D, and I just want to put to you really quickly, I see why companies are hesitant to do that, but don't you think it's so wise for them to do that, because it's a way to differentiate themselves? And this is an industry where it's there doesn't seem to be a lot of differentiation. It seems very difficult for companies to create marketing and promotional around themselves that shows why they're different, why they're better than their competitors and other. And it's a crowded space. So maybe you could speak just a little bit to the value of differentiation through the avenues that you've been talking about. That's question number one. I'll put that to you first.
Great. Well, if you go to any cannabis, air quote, industry conference, there's usually half the content is about branding, about building your brand, about getting the nicest logo, getting shelf space. And that is, a very superficial, that's for the first buyer, right? That's for the first time someone wants to buy your product. But when we're really talking about making larger moves, you're really looking at business to business. You're really looking at these sort of larger ways that you need to stand out, and also to have your, someone come back and buy that product again. And, as we move out of a boutique space, which, cannabis consumption is still pretty boutique, in order for us to, jump from being in the neighborhood pharmacy to being at CVS, again, it's going to be that the manufacturers at the next level of that industry have to depend on your product. And the only way that you can do that is through R&D. The only way to really be able to prove yourself in that marketplace is to make that investment. And I've sat through a lot of investor meetings over the last decade, and in the last 5 years, I think something that's very interesting is just how focused so many companies are on just being the best in the marketplace that we see now. A, and B, this sort of vision that it's a foregone conclusion that this marketplace grows and continues to flourish. And I think you can look at lots of other industries to see what has been disruptive and what hasn't, and what has been a fad, and what's hip, and what's the next thing. So in all of the industries that the cannabis market is touching, consumers move on. If someone can't buy a hempcrete house that's 2-story because no one has done the research on whether or not hempcrete can withhold a second floor, then they're going to move on, right? And the same thing is true of the car company that thinks it would be interesting to put in a plastic dashboard. If there isn't enough product out there that they can buy year after year to manufacture those cars, they're going to move on.
Well,
keep going. With all of the
excellent answer
sectors.
to a poorly
And so,
articulated question. I'll try to do better on the second question, which is to that point. It's easy for people to get discouraged, and I think mainly about the farmers. I think about someone who planted a hemp crop one year and then decided it didn't go very well. I'm not going to do it again. And you talk about something that's seldom talked about, which is we all think that cannabis is great, but if it doesn't actually compete with the product that's already on the market that is a non-cannabis product that is effective, what's the impetus for cannabis? Just because it's cannabis or cannabinoids? Or so I just, what do you say? We've heard a lot about the research, and it's absolutely pivotal. But what do you say to keep people from getting discouraged? I don't know what to say to a farmer who grew hemp last year and was totally burned, and who's thinking, I'm just going to grow corn again. And I see that, in this conversation, I see that in all parts of the supply chain. How do you keep people motivated and passionate just to keep getting the work done to get us ultimately where we want to go, which I think is what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer is people need to do their job, right, and stop looking at this as a business that they're going to fail next year, and actually look at this as a marketplace that is going to, push its way, into textiles, into herbal products, into pharmaceuticals. Right? It means that you're absolutely right. There are so many farmers that just have to. I mean, on one hand, you just need to forget about CBD. That was a weird thing that happened. It's never going to happen again. So if that's why you were growing it, enjoy that one crop you got. That's it. It's just never going back. And then secondly, I would say that, for people that are looking at the final product of a medicine, of a dietary supplement, of hempcrete, they've got to go all the way back to the farmer. And the reality is, outside of a few regions on this planet, some in Mexico, a little bit in South America, and some in Africa, farmland is used up. It's used. So if you want someone to grow your hemp or cannabis, you have to convince them to stop growing what they're growing and to grow what you want them to grow. And the only way you can do that is articulate what it is you need. Right. So don't just say hemp, but actually start, focusing on being able to supply these farmers the seeds they need to ensure that they can sell their crops. But if this marketplace does not do that, there is no marketplace.
So Steph, what a great way to just kind of encapsulate what legitimizing cannabis is for you. Because what you're telling the marketplace, not the industry, is that start with the end in mind, which is crucial for all of the different stakeholders, or the farmers will continue to lose out on their crops and what they harvest. Brands will continue to lose out on commercial opportunities because they don't have the claims and the safety data that people are looking for. And at the end of the day, it's the consumers that lose out because they have the belief that CBD could be doing something for them, and yet they don't know where to go or what products to take. And it as we said it, if you get that one CBD product that worked for them, that's great, but there's all the others that may try CBD once, and if it doesn't work, then they're not going to come back. So thank you so much, Steph.
The epitome of legitimizing cannabis. I think this conversation, we've fired on all cylinders, and really love the message from this isn't an industry. Stop calling it an industry. It's
a marketplace. I love it.
The point is well taken, and we so appreciate you coming on today and joining us on here. We can't wait to talk to you again soon, Steph.
Well, thanks again for having me. This was fantastic. I love actually being asked questions I want to answer. And for any of your listeners, if they want to find out more about ICCI, they can visit our website, ICCI.science, or they can reach out to me, Steph at ICCI.science. Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hoban Minute. Do you have any ideas for episode topics or guests? We would like to hear from you. Reach out to us at media@hoban.law and stay tuned for more on the Hoban Minute.